Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be tackling a concept that, well, it might make some of you squirm a little in your seats. Nihilism.
Yes. Nihilism.
But we're not going to wallow in doom and gloom here.
Right.
We have a fantastic guide for this journey, and that's Nietzsche, specifically his work, The Will to Power.
Mm-hmm.
And Nietzsche was anything but a passive nihilist.
Yeah, he was. What's really fascinating is that Nietzsche didn't see nihilism as some kind of fringe philosophy, you know?
Right.
He saw it as a genuine epidemic spreading through Europe in the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
And he traced it back to, well, kind of the crumbling of traditional values.
Yeah.
And, the rise of scientific thinking challenging all those old ways of making sense of the world.
Yeah, it's like the foundation was pulled out from under society's feet.
Exactly.
And people were left kind of scrambling,
Yeah.
trying to figure out, what do we hold on to now?
Totally. And this is what really fascinated Nietzsche, the psychological fallout. He argued that nihilism wasn't just an intellectual idea, but a real, lived psychological state, a feeling of emptiness and just lack of purpose.
So let's get into that. What exactly did he mean by this, nihilism as a psychological state?
Well, he actually identified three distinct forms of nihilism. The first form is this idea that everything, all of life's struggles, all this constant change, all this becoming,
Yeah.
it's ultimately, it's pointless.
Oh, wow.
It's like, we're all hamsters on a wheel, right? We're going through the motions, but we're not actually getting anywhere. There's no grand plan, no ultimate meaning.
Kind of like that feeling of, existential dread.
Exactly.
When you realize that no matter what you do, you'll eventually be dust in the cosmic wind.
Right. So the second form takes this a step further. It's the realization that any true world that we might construct, whether through religion or philosophy, even personal beliefs, it's ultimately a fabrication. It's a comforting story, a way to cope with the chaos of existence,
So you're saying all these systems that we create to make sense of things, they're just elaborate illusions?
That's the tough realization, yeah.
It's a bitter pill to swallow.
It is. And this leads to the third form, which Nietzsche saw as the most challenging. This is the acceptance that this world, this world of becoming with all its good and bad, all its joy and sorrow, that's all there is. There's no heaven, no ultimate judgment, just this.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's almost like a radical acceptance of reality.
Right.
Stripped of all those comforting narratives.
Exactly.
No wonder Nietzsche called it a crisis.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where he got really concerned, especially in the context of Europe. He saw morality divorced from a religious context, becoming this prime breeding ground for nihilism.
So even systems designed to guide us toward goodness, like being a good person, they could actually end up making us feel lost and empty.
That was his argument. And he saw this as a symptom of this really ingrained human habit, We constantly look for authorities, for meaning, for purpose.
We're always asking, for what?
Yeah.
Trying to find some justification outside of ourselves.
Exactly. And Nietzsche argued that, even when we think we've broken free, we often just swap one authority for another. The authority of conscience can become just as tyrannical as any external rule.
So even our own, internal voice can become a source of oppression. That's pretty deep.
Nietzsche was all about challenging those assumptions, digging deeper, really examining the foundations of our beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where his concept of decadence comes into play.
Okay, decadence. Now tell us more about how he connected this to nihilism.
Well, he saw decadence as a state of decline, exhaustion, a loss of vital energy, and not just individually, but culturally.
Right.
And he argued that many of the so-called remedies for nihilism, things like clinging to traditional morality or even, blind faith in progress, these were actually masking the problem. So it's like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
Right.
Covering up the symptoms, but not addressing the root cause.
Exactly. Can you give us a real concrete example of what he meant?
Yeah, sure. He used this image of altruistic morality, this constant emphasis on, pity and self-sacrifice. He saw that as a symptom of weakness. He compared it to someone with overstimulated nerves, always vibrating, reacting to every little touch.
Always on edge.
Yeah, always giving away their energy.
Mm-hmm.
And he argued that this type of morality, while seeming noble, was actually masking a lack of inner strength.
So it's more about alleviating personal discomfort than genuine concern for others.
That's the heart of his critique. And Nietzsche also observed this really strange phenomenon in history where exhausted people, they're often mistaken for the most fulfilled.
Oh, wow.
And the truly fulfilled, they're mistaken for the most harmful.
That's interesting.
He said, those who are poor in life, those are his words, they impoverish life itself, while those who are rich in life, they enrich it.
That's a really fascinating observation. So you're saying the truly vibrant individuals, they might be misjudged because they don't fit the mold.
Yeah, exactly. And he saw this leading to a kind of cult of the fool,
A cult of the fool.
where people who appear busy but inwardly depleted, they're mistaken for the powerful ones.
We're buying into a facade,
Right.
not seeing the truth.
Yeah.
All this talk about nihilism and decadence, it's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
Did Nietzsche offer any glimmer of hope in all of this?
Well, this is where it gets interesting, because despite his diagnosis, Nietzsche wasn't entirely pessimistic.
Okay.
He believed the modern world, especially democratic Europe, was presenting, a mixed bag. Some signs pointed to decline, others to strength. But the problem, he argued, was that our feelings about values were often outdated. We were clinging to old maps in a landscape that was rapidly changing.
Right.
And this made us misunderstand the potential of the present moment. In fact, Nietzsche saw this era as a time of incredible opportunity for those with strong will and spirit.
So even amidst all this chaos and uncertainty, there was a chance for something like powerful and new to emerge.
That's what he saw. He saw democratic Europe as increasingly, trainable, a fertile ground for those who could command to find those who would obey. He pointed to figures like Napoleon and Bismarck as individuals who thrived in this environment.
They were able to harness the energy of the time,
Exactly.
shape it to their will.
Precisely. And he contrasted them with figures like Ranke and Renan, who he saw as, these objective gentlemen with weak wills, easily toppled in this new world. But Nietzsche also warned that even good qualities, if taken to an extreme, could become weaknesses.
Oh, interesting. So even things like equality and mildness, if pushed too far, they could contribute to decline.
That was his concern. He was worried that these tendencies, particularly things like universal suffrage and the trend towards excessive leniency in the face of crime, or stupidity, these could pave the way for the victory of stupidity, as he put it, and the unscrupulous.
It's a complex picture for sure. Opportunities for strength, but also the risk of falling into new forms of weakness.
Yeah.
Did he offer any specific signs of hope?
Well, he did. He pointed to one really intriguing development. He said the 19th century European was becoming more comfortable acknowledging their instincts,
Okay.
their unconditional naturalness, as he put it. And he saw this as a step towards strength, a return to the kind of vitality he admired in the late 17th century.
So moving towards a more authentic way of being.
Yes.
Less inhibited.
Exactly. He seemed to see that as a glimmer of hope amidst this, complex and often troubling landscape. We've explored Nietzsche's ideas about nihilism as a psychological state, its connection to decadence, but we've also seen that he wasn't completely without hope. He saw potential for strength and even some positive trends. Now, I'm really curious to delve into his concept of the will to power.
Yeah, me too.
How did he see this as a counterforce to this all-pervasive nihilism?
Let's discuss.
So the will to power, this is really at the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy.
Okay.
And it's not just some human thing. He saw this as the fundamental driving force in all of life, in every single thing.
Okay. So it's not about that stereotypical image of dominating others or craving political power.
No, not quite. It's much more subtle than that. Imagine it more as this raw, vital energy, an inherent striving for growth, expansion, overcoming any obstacle in its way. This is what propels life forward, the very impulse that makes us want to create, to learn, to achieve.
So an internal engine.
Exactly.
Driving us to become more.
Yeah. And Nietzsche believed this will to power, it's often misunderstood, even suppressed, especially by those traditional moral systems that preach self-denial, putting yourself last.
You mean those systems that tell us to be humble, to quiet our ambitions? Those might actually be weakening us.
That's exactly what he was saying.
Yeah.
He saw much of traditional morality, particularly the Christian morality that was prevalent in Europe at the time, as being fundamentally life-denying. It was about subduing our instincts, our will to power. And he believed this led to a kind of spiritual sickness.
It makes you passive, resigned to fate,
Right.
instead of being active and creative.
Exactly. And he believed this stifling of the will to power, this was a major contributor to the rise of that nihilism we were talking about. If we're constantly being told that our natural desires are bad, sinful, that we have to deny ourselves, bow to some higher authority, well, it's no wonder we start feeling like life has no meaning.
Right, we lose that spark,
Yes.
the inner fire to strive for something more. So how did Nietzsche see this will to power then as the antidote to this, this pervasive nihilism?
He believed that by really understanding, truly embracing our will to power, we could reclaim that sense of meaning and purpose that nihilism threatens to take away. Instead of searching for meaning in something outside ourselves, we find it within, in that inherent drive to grow, to overcome any challenge that life throws at us.
So becoming the author of your own meaning, not relying on some, external script. But how do we actually do that in a practical sense? Can you give us some examples of how we can channel this will to power in a positive way?
Well, think about any great creative accomplishment, right? Whether it's a masterpiece of art, a groundbreaking scientific discovery, or even just building a successful business from nothing. These are all expressions of the will to power. This deep-seated drive to create something new, something meaningful in the world.
So it's not about power over others, but about, expressing your own potential, whatever form that takes.
Yeah, exactly. Nietzsche was a huge advocate for individual self-realization. He believed each of us possesses unique talents and abilities that we should nurture, bring into the world.
Right.
He also saw the will to power as essential for overcoming personal challenges, for pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zones, evolving as individuals.
It's about pushing those boundaries, not just our own, but societal ones too, right?
He certainly believed that those with a strong will to power were often the ones who challenged the status quo, propelled humanity forward, even if in ways that made others uncomfortable. Think of a figure like Socrates. Nietzsche both admired and criticized Socrates. Socrates challenged conventional wisdom, questioned everything, and ultimately faced the consequences.
He was a disruptor, shook things up, forced people to see the world in a new way.
But wasn't Nietzsche also kind of wary of this will to power?
Yeah.
Didn't he acknowledge its potential to be destructive as well?
Oh, absolutely. He was very aware that the will to power, if it wasn't channeled constructively, it could lead to violence, domination, all sorts of destructive behaviors. We see this throughout history, right? In the actions of tyrants and conquerors who let their ambition run unchecked.
Right.
So it is a powerful force, but it can be used for good or for evil.
Depending on the wielder. How do we ensure that our own will to power doesn't turn into something harmful?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Nietzsche believed that one key was self-awareness.
We need to understand our own motivations, our strengths, our weaknesses. Be honest with ourselves about the potential for good and evil within each of us.
So a lot of introspection.
Yeah.
Brutal honesty.
Yes. And it also requires developing what Nietzsche called self-overcoming.
Self-overcoming.
Yeah. This means continually challenging ourselves, pushing past our limits, but doing it in a way that's both creative and life-affirming. It's about finding that balance between our will to power and our capacity for discipline, self-control.
So not suppressing the will to power, but refining it, shaping it into something that serves both ourselves and the world around us.
Precisely. Nietzsche believed this process of self-overcoming was crucial for creating new values, for moving beyond the constraints of traditional morality that he found so limiting. He envisioned a future where individuals would forge their own values based on their unique understanding of life and their own will to power.
A world where each person is empowered to create their own meaning, their own purpose.
Yeah.
It's a radical idea, but also incredibly liberating.
Radical, yeah, but also incredibly empowering. And it's a vision that still resonates with us today. We've delved deep into Nietzsche's thoughts on nihilism, decadence, and the will to power. He's given us a lot to think about.
He has.
Is there anything else we should keep in mind as we try to navigate this, complex and often contradictory world that he described?
That's a great question. I think it's important to remember that, above all, Nietzsche was a critic. He questioned everything, even his own ideas.
Right.
So we shouldn't take his words as gospel truth, but as invitations to engage in that same kind of critical thinking ourselves.
Exactly. He wanted to provoke us, shake us out of complacency, force us to confront those big questions about life, meaning, and value.
To become philosophers in our own right.
Yes.
Not just followers of someone else's doctrine.
He saw philosophy as a way of life, not just an intellectual exercise. And he believed each of us has the potential to be philosophers, to craft our own perspectives on the world and live in accordance with our self-created values.
That's a That's a powerful message. It ties back to that idea of self-realization,
Hmm.
embracing our will to power, shaping our own destiny.
Right.
I'm also curious to hear more about Nietzsche's critique of Christianity. He seemed to view it as a major force behind the rise of nihilism in Europe. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Nietzsche's relationship with Christianity, it was complex and often misconstrued. He wasn't just like dismissing religion altogether. He was deeply interested in the psychological and historical impact of Christianity, particularly on European culture. He recognized it as a powerful force,
Right.
one that had shaped Western values, Western morality for centuries. But he also saw it as a force that had become, well, life-denying and ultimately nihilistic.
Seems like he admired those early Christians,
Yeah.
and their unwavering commitment, but saw the institution of the church as having kind of morphed into something quite different.
He was fascinated by the figure of Jesus, saw him as a kind of rebel against the established order, admired his emphasis on love and compassion, but also perceived a deep sadness, a resentment in his teachings, like a rejection of the world and its pleasures.
World weariness.
Yeah, he saw it as a symptom of that decadence he believed was already present in the Roman world. And he argued that Christianity, while initially a force for change, ultimately became a tool for preserving power, suppressing individual freedom.
So it became the very thing it initially opposed.
That's how he saw it. And he saw this especially in the way Christian morality had come to dominate European thought, that emphasis on sin, guilt, self-denial. He felt it had created a culture of fear and resentment, a culture that was fundamentally opposed to life and its joys.
It turned us against our own nature, our own will to power.
And this, for Nietzsche, this was the fertile ground where nihilism could take root. If we're constantly told that our natural desires are bad, that we have to deny ourselves, submit to some higher power, then it's no surprise that we begin to feel like life is meaningless.
Right. We lose that vital spark,
Yeah.
that drive to create, to push ourselves further.
Nietzsche saw this playing out in the art, the literature, the philosophy of his time. He believed European culture had become decadent, fixated on death, on suffering, on the afterlife. And he saw Christianity as a major contributor to this decline.
He seemed to, yearn for a return to that connection with vital energy, that pure joy of existence he saw in, the pagan cultures of ancient Greece and Rome.
He was a huge admirer of the Greeks, especially their art, their wholehearted embrace of life in all its fullness. He felt they had a much healthier relationship with their instincts, with their will to power, than the Christians did.
Right. They weren't afraid to celebrate beauty, strength, even those aspects that some might consider the darker sides of human nature.
Nietzsche saw those qualities as integral parts of the human experience, aspects that Christianity had tried to suppress. And he believed that this suppression had weakened us, made us passive, ultimately led us down the path of nihilism.
So how did he propose we escape this trap? How do we move beyond this Christian morality that he found so detrimental?
He believed we needed to forge new values, values that embrace life, acknowledged our inherent will to power. He saw this as the task.
This has been a really fascinating exploration of Nietzsche's ideas. He grappled with some of the deepest questions about life, about meaning, about value.
Yeah.
And while he didn't offer any easy answers, he certainly challenged us to think critically and to forge our own paths in the world. So we were talking about how Nietzsche saw traditional morality potentially leading to nihilism. He was particularly critical of Christianity. Right?
Yeah, especially how it kind of shaped European thought. One of his big criticisms was Christianity's focus on making humanity better.
Okay.
He actually saw this striving for improvement as working against our natural instincts,
It seems counterintuitive. How could trying to be a better person be a bad thing?
Well, Nietzsche argued that many of those qualities praised by Christian morality, like meekness, humility, self-sacrifice, these were tools used by the weak to control the strong.
So it wasn't about genuine goodness.
Yeah.
Or personal growth.
He saw it more as a way for the weak to, to gain a moral victory over the strong, make them feel guilty for their strength, their vitality.
It's like flipping the script, isn't it?
Right.
The strong become the bad guys.
Exactly. And it ties back into his concept of decadence,
Right.
The cult of the fool, where true strength is mistaken for something negative.
So those who embrace life challenges, they're labeled as harmful, while the exhausted masses, they're seen as the virtuous ones.
That's what he was getting at. And Nietzsche saw the priest as a key figure in this moral inversion.
Mhm.
He argued that the priest, with that focus on sin, guilt, the afterlife, had basically poisoned our experience of the here and now.
Instead of appreciating this life, we're just focused on what comes after death.
Exactly. It's a devaluation of the body, the senses, all those things that make life well worth living. Nietzsche saw it as a kind of like spiritual sickness that had permeated European culture. It affected art, literature, even philosophy.
Earlier, you mentioned Nietzsche's admiration for the ancient Greeks.
Right.
Did he see them as representing a different, maybe a healthier way of being?
Oh, absolutely. He admired their wholehearted embrace of life, in all its fullness, their connection to their instincts, what he called the will to power.
Yeah.
They celebrated beauty, strength. They weren't afraid to acknowledge the darker aspects of human nature.
It's like he's urging us to reclaim that vital energy, that Dionysian spirit.
Right.
Embrace both the light and shadow.
Yes.
But how do we do that in a world that's, still so heavily influenced by these moral systems he was critiquing?
Well, that's the challenge, isn't it? Nietzsche didn't offer a step-by-step guide.
Right.
But he did give us some powerful tools for thought.
Okay.
He encouraged us to understand the will to power not as this force for domination,
Right.
but as the driving force behind self-realization, reaching our full potential.
So it's about harnessing that drive to create, to grow, to overcome obstacles, not to conquer other people.
Exactly. And it's through understanding our own will to power that we can start to create new values that align with our own experience and affirm our individual potential.
Values that help us embrace life instead of fearing it or denying it.
Right. Nietzsche believed this was the only way to overcome nihilism and create a truly meaningful existence.
He wasn't saying to just accept meaninglessness, was he?
No, not at all. He was saying we have to become the creators of our own meaning. And that takes courage, honesty, a willingness to question everything, even the things that we hold most dear.
Which brings us to one of Nietzsche's most well-known and often misunderstood statements. God is dead.
Yeah.
What did he actually mean by that?
It's important to understand he wasn't simply promoting atheism. It was more a statement about the decline of traditional sources of meaning, sources of authority. We live in a world where those old certainties, well, they just don't hold the same weight anymore. So we have to find new ways to ground ourselves, to create meaning in a world that might seem, stripped of those old absolutes.
Oh. So what does all this mean for us then today? What can we take away from Nietzsche's thinking as we navigate this, this complex, ever-changing world?
Well, I think it's a call to action, really, to examine our own lives, our own values, to ask ourselves honestly, are these values truly life-affirming? Are we embracing our will to power in a way that's both creative and healthy?
Right.
Or are we letting ourselves be ruled by fear, by guilt, by resentment?
It's a real challenge, isn't it?
It is.
To take responsibility for our own lives, become the authors of our own meaning, our own purpose.
Exactly. And to remember that truth is always evolving. What we believe today might change tomorrow, and that's okay. It's all part of the journey.
A journey that Nietzsche encourages us to approach with passion.
Yeah.
And a critical mind.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Nietzsche's work. It's challenging, it's thought-provoking. Hopefully it sparked some new ideas, maybe inspired you to explore Nietzsche's work a little further on your own. Until next time, keep diving.